C.S. Lewis's critique of scientific utopianism was at the heart of his novel That Hideous Strength, which tells the story of a conspiracy to transform England into a scientific dictatorship. The conspiracy is led by a government bureaucracy with the deceptively innocuous name of the National Institute of Coordinated Experiments, or NICE.
I think that Hideous Strength and Huxley's Brave New World are the two greatest dystopias in our language in the 20th century.
The agenda of NICE in That Hideous Strength reads like a wish list drawn up by the era's leading scientific social reformers. It included sterilization of the unfit, selective breeding, biochemical conditioning, experimentation on both animals and criminals, and above all, truly scientific planning.
A scientific planning that is pretending to provide a new humanity that is doing away with traditional ethics, that is doing away with all traditional restraints.
Lewis depicts a world in That Hideous Strength in which nothing is sacred. Daniel Bell has told us that the essence of modernity is that nothing is sacred. In The Abolition of Man and also in That Hideous Strength, we see the consequences of a world in which nothing is sacred, which includes the human person. The human person is not sacred, and when that happens, there are no distinctions between individuals or humans and animals or humans and vegetables or humans and minerals, and we have the kind of thing we've had in the 20th century.
In the 2 decades before his death, Lewis became increasingly alarmed by the rise of scientific authoritarianism.
Lewis was very concerned by the dogmatic use of science, and that is why he wrote his novel, That Hideous Strength. That is why he wrote his book, The Abolition of Man, where he actually worries and somewhat sort of predicts the rise of a new class of people, of experts speaking in the name of science, who would dictate to everyone else. In fact, by the end of his life, Lewis was worrying about the rise of what he called scientocracy, government and society that claims to be based on the claims of modern science, but in reality really is based on a scientific clique of a few people who are speaking in the name of science. And maybe they are adopting the majority view of science, but they're claiming the right to rule based on their scientific knowledge and expertise.
Lewis's concern about authoritarian science seems eerily prophetic. In a world driven by science and technology, those who question the new order, like C.S. Lewis did, increasingly find themselves labeled anti-science. C.S. Lewis would have rejected the charge.
Lewis did not accept the idea that science was a special form of knowledge that was somehow immune to inspection, that was somehow cordoned off from the non-specialist assessing the deliverances of the sciences. Lewis was well aware that, first of all, that there's no such thing as science as such. There are sciences, and each science has its particular methods and its particular areas of study. And also that the sciences, to be good, need to interact with one another, but they do so by means of the larger tools of good, rational, critical thinking. And so that the things that the scientists say are subject to review by everyone who is able to think well, to think critically, to think rationally.
Lewis did not deny that scientific expertise might be necessary for good public policy in many areas, but he insisted that science alone was not sufficient.
Knowing, say, how things work, knowing how cells work, or knowing how ecosystems work, doesn't tell you what you ought to do for your society. Because public policy is not just about the technical expertise of how things work. It's about what good is worth having at what price. And as C.S. Lewis pointed out, on these questions, a scientific training gives you no added value. Scientists are not moral philosophers, yet political and social judgments involve not just how do things work and how can we make them work better, but how should we act, and what's worth spending money on, and what's worth doing, and what freedoms are worth giving up or not. And on these sorts of moral and ethical questions, someone's science training doesn't give them the right to dictate to the rest of society. C.S. Lewis thought that science was a good thing, but he also thought that it held some really strong dangers. The biggest danger really was the penchant to control. In a scientific view, if you think that is the only way that we have knowledge of the world, and so if you think that if I have the scientific truth about something, that's, end of story, I know everything, that really tends to feed a power trip. Whether you're a scientist or you're a politician who's trying to latch on to the prestige of science, you really have people who are going to abuse their power because they think, look, we're the only ones who know what should happen because we know how the universe really works. Therefore, we should be able to dictate what our cultural beliefs are. We should dictate what our government should do, how we should design governmental programs. We should dictate all manner of public policy, and that anyone who doesn't have a scientific training or isn't part of the consensus view of science is basically stupid or against progress or against science, and so should be really swept by the wayside and shouldn't be listened to. And I think Lewis thought that that almost totalitarian impulse was really a dangerous thing. Lewis, I think, was properly so frightened by that potential within science. And that's why he stressed why we really need a way to understand the limits of science, and that there is something behind science, a larger transcendent ethical sphere behind science, and that we aren't just blind matter in motion, that we're part of a designed universe that actually sets limits on what we should and shouldn't do.
It's an age-old problem. How do we prevent something good from being twisted for evil ends? C.S. Lewis hoped that scientists themselves would find a way to rescue science from scientism, creating a regenerate science that respected human rights and honored human dignity, a science that would no longer be the magician's twin.